thank you. I'm so excited that you're here. In fact, I'm probably more excited that you're here than you're excited that you're here. I have been a ham radio operator for 29 years, so next year will be my 30th year. I was first licensed when I was 13 years old, and I took the 30-year-old book version of what you have, and for about 2 weeks just did nothing except read that. So I just poured myself into that. So every waking moment outside of 8th grade, I just read and read and read and read. And then I'm sure if my mother was here, she could attest to you that it drove her up the wall, because I constantly was, please quiz me, quiz me, quiz me. So having her read, so she probably learned a lot of that stuff through osmosis that way. But the really interesting and great thing about ham radio, and something that why it's like this, why do you have to take this big test and learn all this information? It's completely different than pretty much anything else that the government has you do, because for the most part, the government is happy for you just to pay some amount of money and they'll give you a license to do whatever, whether it's driving or starting some kind of a business, whatever they choose to regulate. It generally comes down to money. Ham radio is not about that at all. In fact, ham radio is a non-commercial activity. You hopefully have found that out through your pre-studies. And the one thing about it is ham radio has always been kind of an art. They view it as, this is something that you should learn, that you can provide community service with. Ham radio works when nothing else does work. And that's because ham radio does not require any form of formalized infrastructure. One of the things that ham radio has integrated a lot with infrastructure, such as the internet, and it allows a lot of interesting ways of communications. However, it never relies upon that. That's just something that's in addition. One of the nice things about it is that because of the way they require it and require training and information, is that you will actually understand what you're doing. You're not going to be simply just an operator. You can go buy a car and you put the key in and you drive it. You learn to operate the car, but you don't know how to actually run that car. You can have your driver's license and not know a thing about how your car works. You definitely don't necessarily know how to fix your car. And although your level of knowledge certainly at this level isn't necessarily going to allow you to just take a radio apart and fix it, it does give you that entry level of knowledge, and you will actually understand how your radio works. And that's important because ham radio is a lot about experimentation and the ability to go out and learn and do things. One of the things that I like to see so much is parents that get their ham radio license have children that then get their ham radio license, or grandparents and have encouraged their children and grandchildren to get that ham radio license. I'm sure there probably is one, but I am not aware of a single space shuttle launch that carried astronauts that didn't have at least one ham radio operator on board. Nearly every astronaut is also a ham radio operator. And so every little kid wants to be an astronaut growing up. Well, not most of them probably won't be, but some of them will be. And so introducing them to the science and technology early on gives them an amazing leg up, and it certainly allows them to understand the world around them better. Wireless technology is around us everywhere, from our cell phones to our Wi-Fi in our home. A lot of talk about 5G and how that's bad for you, or maybe it's not bad for you. But when people talk about it, they talk about it out of complete lack of knowledge, which is ignorance. They don't understand what it is. They're just told it's bad. And maybe it is bad, but wouldn't it be nice to intelligently have that conversation and say, oh yeah, well, that part of it maybe isn't bad, but this part is, and I know why now. I guess I want to set a couple ground rules for the class. The first is there is no stupid question. If you have a question, please ask it. It's also, rule number 2 would be, do not allow me to move on to the next topic if you don't understand. The entire purpose for me to be here is to explain this information to you. And I will explain it 100 ways if that's what it takes for you to understand, because it's very important. Because if I move on to something else and now you have a hole in your, gap in your knowledge, you won't be successful. And I really want you to be successful in this. I have been doing this for, 29 years. So for me, a lot of it seems it's second nature. But for you, well, you probably don't know electronics, and your knowledge of physics is probably, goes back to 12th grade or 10th grade, and you forgot all about that. And so let's talk about that. So again, any questions, make sure you ask, and do not allow me to move on without that. I put my email address on this board. Please write that down. If you have questions while you're studying, email me. If you have questions after you pass your test, email me. If you, especially for the Zoom people, after you pass your test, email me. Let me know your call sign and where you're at. I would love to be able to connect with you on the air sometime, or just know that, hey, people were successful from this. So please make sure that you stay in contact. And again, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yes. No, so the question was, does my email work off of the ham radio? No, this is traditional email, but I own the D-Star domain. The reason I have that is because for a few years, I moved out to Washington State. I worked for ICOM America. ICOM is probably the world's largest amateur radio manufacturer. And I was the product development engineer for the D-Star system, which is a ham radio system of digital voice and high-speed data. Digital voice is becoming very commonplace within amateur radio. D-Star was the first. D-Star is also the primary technology for a high-speed data communications on ham radio. So that's why I have that. They're in Kirkland, Washington now. They used to be in Bellevue, Washington. So it's just east of Seattle. Yep. Okay, so the slides that we're going to go through are basically just questions from your book. And so from that, I will explain what it's talking about and how we understand and why some of these things are important. Well, my clicker is not, there it goes. Okay. There are about 460 slides. So again, unless you want me to just kill you with PowerPoint, please ask questions. I know that the people online can ask questions, and Michelle will relay that up to me. So again, I definitely want this to be interactive. These are things that you are not going to understand, and that is fine. Okay, this is a frequency chart. It's probably a little difficult to see, but what I want you to see is the main takeaway from this is that there are different segments of frequencies. They are referred to as HF, VHF, UHF, and then generally understood as microwaves. Your technician class license primarily gives you operating privileges within the VHF and UHF frequencies. You do get some abilities within the HF frequencies, but not very many. really what I would encourage most of you to do, I know you're certainly focused on this test, and that's absolutely what you need to do, but you need to also have in the back of your mind that you would want to progress to the next level license, which will give you privileges on this HF frequency band. HF is where you're going to gain most of your worldwide communications capabilities. If you want to be able to set up an antenna in your backyard and communicate with somebody in Europe, Japan, Australia, Russia, anywhere, you will have that ability using no infrastructure, completely self-contained on your own with those HF frequencies. You can install an HF radio in your car, and you will have a large obnoxious antenna on your car, but you won't look that weird to me because I've had that and done that. But I have literally been driving in my car, got on the HF frequencies, and have been speaking to people just as I'm talking to you now, plain as day, over in Europe, just as I'm cruising around, passing the time, driving, commuting to work. So your abilities, once you get on those HF frequencies, go up greatly. Okay, so this first question, it talks about, so which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service? So this is the FCC. This is important to know because the FCC is who licenses us and enforces our regulations, but they're only within the United States. There are other regulatory bodies outside of the United States. So the other thing to understand about your test is the test consists of question pools, and the pool of questions are broken up into sections. And so there will be 5 or 6 questions that basically ask the same thing, have a very similar answer, but it allows them to, when they pull question here and a question here and a question here, to be able to make different tests so that 2 people sitting next to each other can be taking the same test but not have the exact same questions and answers on that test. So if you gain the fundamental knowledge, it won't matter what question they ask you, you'll be able to pass that test. So which of the following is a purpose of the amateur radio service as stated in the FCC rules and regulations? Remember before I said radio, amateur radio or ham radio is considered to be an art. So if you can keep that in your mind, you'll realize, okay, it's for advancing the skills, right? We're becoming quite technical. We're learning electronics and different physics related materials. And so we are also then advancing the art of radio or radio. It would be FCC Part 97 for amateur radio. So it's CFR 97 dot and then whichever regulation beyond that. So for which license classes are new licenses currently available from the FCC? Okay, that would be technician, general, and amateur extra. Yes. There used to be quite a bit more back in the day. So back when I got my license, there was a novice, a technician plus, a general, an advanced, and an extra class. So they had quite a few. I went through every single one of those. When I got my license, they had eliminated the Morse code requirement, which is great. However, well, they eliminated the Morse code requirement to get your technician class license, but to go beyond that, you had to get at least 5 words per minute Morse code. So I got the Morse code. I do know Morse code. I am incredibly rusty, but I do know it, and I can use it, although I almost never do anymore. It's no longer a requirement, but there is an amazing amount of people who still use it today. And so it's certainly something that's worthwhile. You know, one of the real benefits of Morse code is that Morse code can be understood when conditions are terrible. So when the quality of the signal is very poor, you couldn't maybe make out what the person is saying, but you can definitely hear that little dot or dash beeping through the air, and you can decode that quite clear. One form of communications that is, I don't want to say very popular because it's not like everybody does it. It requires quite an elaborate setup, but definitely that uses Morse code. It's called moon bounce. And it's where you have a VHF, or more likely a UHF signal that is very line of sight. It also penetrates through the atmosphere very well. And you literally point your antenna at the moon. You send your signal to the moon reflects it, it bounces off like a ball hitting the wall, and it comes back down and it showers the earth. So whatever part of the earth, so this entire half of the hemisphere that can see the moon at that time, receives your signal. However, a very small portion of your signal comes back. A lot of it misses the moon and shoots on past. A lot of it is absorbed by the moon, but the part that makes it back comes in, and it's a very weak signal, and it's almost never voice communications. It would be some form of either data communication or Morse code. How soon after passing the examination for your first amateur radio license may you operate a transmitter on the amateur radio service frequency? Well, the answer to that is as soon as your operator/station license grant appears in the FCC license database. Yes. Moon bounce. Moon bounce. Yeah. So the question was, what is it called to send your signal to the moon? And it's moon bounce communications. It's also maybe even more formally known as EME, Earth, Moon, Earth. Yeah. So when you get you pass your test, so we're holding the test here on Saturday, and ultimately everyone that's here needs to sign up for that test for Saturday this weekend. And I really encourage everyone to do that, even though you're right now, I'm sure, thinking you're not ready. You're going to be ready. Let's think of it in a positive way. And so you will pass your test next Saturday, but you can't operate right away. You passed, but you have to wait till the FCC issues your call sign. Basically, that's what your station license is. You're going to get your call sign, which makes sense because how could you operate without a call sign anyway? So you're going to have to wait to receive that in. The nice thing is all this is done electronically now, and you will most likely have your call sign by Tuesday. So you'll pass the test on Saturday, and on Tuesday, you'll be able to look up your license and find that you've been issued your call sign. Back in the day, before the internet existed, when I had my license, you had to wait for your license to come in the mail. The FCC no longer mails them out at all, which is unfortunate because it's nice to have that paper copy. But now that we do have the internet, you can immediately find it. Otherwise, you had to wait a very long time for it to come in the mail. So what is proof of possession of an FCC issued operator/primary license grant? Well, the proof is that your license must appear in the FCC ULS database, because again, they no longer send out a paper copy. And so once the FCC has your license registered in the database, you are allowed to operate, and that is your proof that you are licensed. Now you can print out your own copy. They do generate an electronic one that you can print out yourself, but that's not actually the proof. The proof is that it's in their database. Sorry? Yes, you absolutely can. The question was, can you lose your license? Yes. And I had another question earlier, was asking about, well, do people operate a lot without a license? It does happen occasionally, but one of the things about, so frequencies, so ham radio operators have frequencies that we're allowed to operate on. Frequencies are worth money. They're extremely valuable. You can go do a Google search and look up FCC frequency sale. The FCC routinely sells frequencies to companies like Verizon and AT&T to put up new cell phone towers. So every time a new service comes out, like we went from 3G to 4G to 5G, each one of those those are really fourth generation and fifth generation. They utilize sometimes the old frequencies, but oftentimes are utilizing new sets of frequencies. And those frequencies are owned by the government and are sold to people or allowed for their use in the case of amateur radio. And they are worth not millions of dollars, they are worth billions of dollars. Because once you have, look how much money AT&T makes on cell phones. If they didn't have the use of those frequencies, they would not be in business. The government knows that, and they're worth a ton of money. The value of the amateur radio frequencies, because we have so many, would literally be worth trillions of dollars. And so, yes, they are heavily guarded, heavily enforced. You can regularly see, if you join the ARRL, it's the Amateur Radio Relay League. It's kind of like the NRA for ham radio. So they're the ones that lobby the government to protect our frequencies. They're the ones that would lobby the government to give us new abilities or capabilities within amateur radio. And so they publish a monthly magazine. And in that, you will often see FCC enforcement rulings. And so it's people who have jammed a local repeater, people have caused malicious or harmful interference, and they are fined tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if they have a license, their license is revoked for life. It's a big deal. Yes.
But what stops them from just continuing to operate without?
Well, nothing would stop you. So the question was, what stops you from continuing to operate without a license? Well, nothing physically stops you until you're put into jail, but oh yes. And so the FCC does have the capability of tracking people down. However, the FCC almost never has to do that. And that's because amateur radio operators fiercely, extremely zealously track down and find people who interfere. And so it's called radio direction finding. In fact, ham radio, and I think it's even one of the questions, it's called fox hunting. And it's something that ham radio operators do for fun. And they will take a very low-powered transmitter and put a Morse code beacon on it, so it's constantly sending out its ID, and somebody will go hide it somewhere. And then they will release the hounds, and so the ham radio operators all tuned to the frequency that this thing is on, and using directional antennas, find and track this thing down, and whoever finds it is the winner. You know, it's a game, but it teaches you the skill of radio direction finding. And so when you decide to be that jammer or person who continues to interfere, ham radio operators are trained, and it is fun, and they will track it down to your house, and they will record the signal. They'll show the evidence of how they triangulated it, and they hand that information over to the FCC on a silver platter. And so when they go to prosecute you, they're like, great, it was done for me. Here's who the bad guy is. Here's how we know. Here's who the people that are involved that tracked it down. And yeah, they will start fining you. And once you start paying tens of thousands of dollars in federal fines, you're probably going to stop. So how many operator or primary station license grants may be held by any one person? Basically, how many licenses can you have? And the answer is 1. You get 1 call sign. That's your call sign.
So your license is your call sign. That's like goes hand in hand.
Yes. So you may have only 1. So you only get 1 call sign. Yes and no. So the question was, does the FCC give you your call sign? And the answer is yes. So as soon as you pass your test, you will be issued a call sign in sequential order. So those of you that live in Ohio, you'll receive a call sign with an 8 in it. And it will be sequential. I don't know what they're on now, probably KF, I believe. So you will probably get, unless they're up to G, maybe, I don't know. But you'll get like a KF8, whatever. And then everyone in this class, when you take the test and pass together, if it just happened to be KF8 AAA, the first person they submit will get AAA, AAB, AAC, AAD, and so you'll all get it in somewhat of a sequence. So that's the way it works. Now, you can apply for a vanity call sign, just like you can get a vanity license plate and get some kind of customized license. Well, you can get that for your call sign as well. And now you are only permitted to get a vanity call sign within your license class. And so my call sign of K7DN, you can tell that that's very short. And as I said, you're going to get a call sign that's something like KE8ABC. That's very long. You cannot get a call sign this short unless you are an extra class. So this is reserved for extra class operators. And for the most part, very short call signs like this are largely already taken. So if we have enough time, I'll go into how you can get one. So I can tell you that this call sign came from a deceased person who the FCC didn't yet know had died. And so I took steps to make sure I got that call sign. So it's not illegal, it's not a secret. I'm just saying it's not germane to your test, but I'll be glad to go through that with you if you want to do that. My wife's call sign, for example, is W8SJY. That's her initials. So it's kind of a neat call sign for her.
Matthew, back to the jamming. Somebody wants to know what prevents the U.S. government from jamming ham radio frequencies, and does the U.S. government have authority under federally decreed emergencies to jam or track ham radio stations?
So can the government jam ham radio? Yes, but that's not easy. So jamming typically occurs on a single frequency, although it can be quite wide. So we're going to talk about then bandwidth. So as an example, if we have the frequency of 144.000 to 148.000, if you're transmitting in amateur radio on a specific frequency with an inexpensive handheld radio, something you're likely to get right after passing this class, you might be transmitting on 146.520. That is a very specific frequency. And if I wanted to jam you from transmitting there, I could transmit exactly there. I might also be able to affect maybe some other frequencies, maybe 146.500 to 146.540. You can see there's a range. So I might be primarily jamming here, but I could also jam off to these sides. But ultimately, the range of frequencies that I'm allowed to transmit on are from 144 to 148 on the 2-meter band. And so you can see there is a very wide range of frequencies I can pick. So if there's somebody jamming right here, I'll just go outside of where they're jamming. It's not very easy to jam wide ranges of frequencies, but it is possible. But this is just one band. I have a great variety of bands. So could they jam? Yes. Would it be very effective? No, because I can just go find a different frequency to jam. Can they track us? Well, yes, absolutely. In fact, they are in that they have a database with your name and where you live. Can they track you on the air? Well, yeah, but I can track you on the air. I mean, you have, anybody can receive on our frequencies. You don't need a license to do that. So is that possible? Yes, absolutely, it's possible. The use of encryption on amateur radio is strictly forbidden. But should there be a time where the law kind of goes out the window, or should somebody need to do that for whatever purpose, could you do it? Absolutely. And so, yeah, they can receive your signal, but they can't decode your signal. So, in fact, I just bought a pair of radios that have military grade encryption in it, and they cost me $180 a piece. And I could be transmitting on it, not lawfully, with the encryption enabled, but I could be transmitting on it and the government receiving that signal, and they absolutely could not decode what I was saying. So just because they can track you doesn't mean they can understand what you're saying or doing. Right. So yes, if you do something that's illegal, like use encryption, they could fine you or take your license away. Yeah. Yeah, assuming you're doing it, yeah. Yeah. But owning the radio is not illegal, and operating the radio without the encryption is not illegal. It's only when you would turn it on.
So is the encryption available on certain frequencies only, certain other licenses?
Encryption would be lawful, for example, the police. So in commercial radio, where the police have frequencies that they operate on. You know how they get those frequencies? They buy them. They pay for it. And so the police, unlike ham radio, where we have a very wide range, the police may only get 2 or 3 very specific frequencies to operate on. And under a commercial business license, you are authorized to run encryption. So if you buy a commercial radio, it's likely to have at least the option or capability of running encryption. Okay, what is the normal term for an FCC issued primary station operator radio license grant. In short, how long is your license good for? Okay. Hopefully everybody knows this is good for 10 years. So what happens after it expires in 10 years? You have to take this class all over again. No, all you have to do is simply fill out a form and renew your license. You're basically just telling the FCC that you're still alive, right? Because they don't know until your license comes up to expire. So that's how I got that license, right? So somebody who had this, got it, had it, or renewed it for 10 years, they pass away. The FCC doesn't know until it comes time to renew it. And once somebody doesn't renew it, they give it a 2-year grace period, and then they would release it to the general public. But if you happen to know that they are deceased, you could inform them ahead of time, and they would immediately release it, and yet nobody knows that it's been released except you, because you're the one that told them, and you could reapply for it. So,
not a silly question. I have a new dual band digital radio. Can I turn it on and listen legally without transmitting?
absolutely, yep. Yep, you can, anybody can receive, it's really no different than going to, of course, Radio Shack's gone. You go to Best Buy or online and buy a police scanner, you absolutely can listen in. No license is ever required to receive.
Another question. What is needed from the FCC before we can take our test?
Well, you have to get a FRN number. So that's where you're going to go on to the FCC's site. That was sent out in the email. Yep, so that. Yes, so everybody received an email that explained how you go in and apply for an FRN number. That FRN number is kind of like your identification to the FCC. And then once you get an FRN number and you pass your test, then they issue your FCC license to that FRN number. Yes, yeah, that needs to be done. So for the people who are taking the test this weekend, which please be everybody in this room, you have to do that this weekend. And the guys that are doing the testing this weekend will take your FRN. They're going to fill out all the forms in advance. So it'll all be really fast and streamlined. And that's why they need that done ahead of time. And there's a form, it's included in that information that you receive, that you go and apply to them to basically give that information so that they can have it all filled out. But we'll go through that on a break because that's specific to this class. But the people online, absolutely, go ahead and apply, get your FRN number, and then go ahead and find a local test to take.
One more question. What is the difference between analog and digital radio?
So analog radio is what you could consider clear speech. So basically just listening to someone speak as if you were in the room with them, where digital radio is where they take a sampling of that audio, convert it to literal ones and zeros, and transmit that over the air. So it's a digital encoding of the voice. Yep. And digital radio is the only way to encrypt radio, because if I'm going to convert my voice into a 1 and 0, we're going to have a standard that agrees that if you receive 1s and 0s in this order, it's what turns it into what I'm saying. But if I hide, if I don't tell you what that sequence is, but only tell somebody else, then it becomes encrypted because you don't know how to decode it properly to receive it. So, yeah, all encrypted radios are digital radios. But not all digital radios are encrypted radios. Let's be clear on that. Digital is absolutely legal. It's not necessarily encrypted. What is the grace period following the expiration of an amateur license in which the license may be renewed? I kind of gave this away earlier. It's 2 years. And so if you were to allow your license to lapse, you forgot to renew it, you would have up to 2 years to renew that license. During this grace period, however, you cannot operate because your license is expired, but you could still renew it. If you waited till after that 2 years, you would have to reapply and you would get a new call sign sequentially ordered. You'd lose your call sign. If your license has expired and it's still within the allowable grace period, you may continue to operate a transmitter on the amateur radio service frequencies. Well, the answer to that is no. As I said before, when you're in that grace period, you are not allowed to operate. So your license is not fully, it's expired, but you're still in the grace period to allow you to renew. These are, again, some of those questions where it's really the same. You would understand the concept of it, but they're going to try to give you some variety to make sure you fully understand.
If a person lives in a rural area and the nearest test location is 3 hours away, what about online testing? Is this an option? Guess what's the process?
Yeah, so there is some online testing that's really just came, if there's ever anything good about COVID, it was that they started doing some online testing. And there are probably several VECs, which is volunteer exam coordinators, that do online testing. I know the ARRL is one of them. So in that email that was sent out, there was a link to the ARRL VE testing, and you could contact them and schedule that test. And so they would require you to have a webcam. You would have to show your workspace, that you don't have the secret answer key or the book just off the camera, and they would have to administer that to you. Yeah. Okay. When is an amateur station required to transmit its assigned call sign? Don't be tripped up by this answer. You are required to transmit your call sign every 10 minutes or at the end of your conversation. So if your conversation is only 5 minutes, then you transmit at the end of your conversation. If your conversation is an hour long, you're going to be saying it every 10 minutes and then at the very end of your conversation. So most of the time, people do frequently say it at the beginning, but that's not the law. The law says it's every 10 minutes and at the end of the conversation. So most of the time, it would say something like W8SJY K7DN. I'm calling my wife, W8SJY K7DN. So I'm basically be no different than if I said, hey, Leah, this is Matt. Okay? So that's the exchange, but that's not required. It would be perfectly acceptable if Leah had her license and I just said, hey, Leah, are you there? And she said, yes. And then we start talking back and forth. And then we hit that 10-minute mark. And then I say K7DN, and she would say her call sign. Yeah. But most people aren't going to do it that way because it would be weird to just call out, because you're calling out to literally anybody could be there and listening, for me to just say, hey, Leah, because there could be more than one Leah, right? And so I'm going to say, if I want to talk to a specific person, I'm going to say their call sign and then identify myself. But that's why that is a bit of a trick question, because most people are going to be used to saying at the beginning, but it's not required. So especially with your technician class license, you're going to be using what we call a repeater. And a repeater is a station located generally at a high location, and it hears your signal and then rebroadcasts it out to give you greater range. That repeater identifies itself automatically every 10 minutes. And so how do I find Leah? Well, she's probably hanging out on the local repeater in this area. And so I would say her call sign, my call sign, and then she responds, and then we start conversing. And then in 10 minutes, probably in 9.5 minutes, whatever they have it set to, the repeater is going to send out its call sign, either by voice or Morse code. I don't need to know Morse code because I just know the repeater is identifying itself, and that's fine. I'm not talking to it. It's a machine. It's just repeating what I'm saying. But it's my reminder. And so whenever the repeater IDs, I ID. That keeps me on track. Now you get on those HF frequencies, those worldwide frequencies. There are not repeaters. Generally, there's some exception, but you're just going to have to keep track. Is the FCC going to give you a $10,000 fine and take away your license because you talked for 12 minutes one time? No, it's not going to be like that. People understand, and the general idea is that they want your communication to be identified, because otherwise they don't really know who you are unless you tell them. So that's the spirit of the law. But what does the law say? Every 10 minutes. Absolutely. Yep. In fact, you'll find far more analog repeaters than you will digital repeaters.
So the repeater is saying it for you.
No, the repeater identifies itself, and then that is your reminder to say it for yourself. Because the repeater is a transmitter too. It has to identify itself, and you have to identify yourself. Yep. So the question was, what kind of range do you get from a local repeater? That depends on which band it's in, because some frequencies are near line of sight, meaning they can go beyond line of sight. Some frequencies are very strictly line of sight, meaning if you have a small hilltop between you and another station, it won't penetrate or won't go over that. It'll hit it and just terminate. It depends on how high the repeater is. Generally in Ohio, based on, we don't have mountains here. So if a repeater is at a high location, it's on a high building or a high tower. And so I would say pretty commonly 30 miles. And you could communicate within a 30-mile radius, which means if you're on one end to the other, 60-mile distance, with a mobile radio. Pretty well, 30 miles. Handheld radios, 5 to 10. But that's great, because if you take your little handheld radio and just try to talk to somebody without a repeater, you're going to be lucky to get 1 to 2 miles range. But through a repeater, that handheld radio could get 5 to 10 to the repeater and then 5 to 10 to the other side. So you might have 20-mile range. I mean, that's, if there was a repeater here in Milford, and there may be, I don't know, I have to look it up, but you could communicate all over town with a handheld radio, anywhere in town. Yes. So the question was, are there scenarios where repeaters talk to another repeater and there's a multi-hop? No. And there's a reason for that. When we get into repeaters, I'll be able to explain why that doesn't really work. However, there is scenarios where repeaters are linked together. So one repeater isn't repeating off of another one, meaning it doesn't hear the signal from another repeater to repeat it, but it's fed a signal from another repeater. So we've got two repeaters on different frequencies, and they are linked together, either by a radio link or by the internet. A radio link is better because it doesn't rely on the internet for it to work. It would continue to work in a disaster. But an internet link is nice because it can span amazing distances, including around the world. You could take your small VHF radio, which basically only has enough range to get to your local repeater, and through that repeater, which is connected to another one, talk to someone in China. It will just come out, go over the internet, go out over their radio, and they'll be able to talk to you, and you can talk back and forth. Yeah, so the question was, how do you find the closest repeater to wherever you are? I believe it's repeaterbook.com is the website. If that's not correct, just Google repeater book. But there they will have a listing of all the repeaters by state, and then they can be further broken down by frequency band. And they will give you all the details on how to connect to those repeaters.
Did you say repeater book or look?
Book.
And that's what it is. Repeater book.
So the question was that why don't repeaters, what's the difference between a repeater linked together and a repeater repeating another repeater? The difference is a technical limitation within the repeater, and I will explain that when we get to the repeater section. Yep. Because you have to understand how a repeater works to understand why that doesn't work. Yep.
So this is something that's way over my head.
Yeah, we'll cover that. Yep. Okay, when may an amateur station transmit on the, when may an amateur station transmit without on the air identification? This is a bit of a trick question, and it's when transmitting signals to control model aircraft. So normally you must always transmit an identification every 10 minutes or at the end of the transmission. There is an exception that allows you to transmit without verbal identification, that's on the air identification. And that's if you're controlling a remote control aircraft. And that's because you're not using a radio, like there's no microphone, right? This is a controller to control like a drone or something like that. So there is no microphone in order to do that with.
So it's not just an aircraft, boat or whatever.
Yeah, it's remote control model craft, yeah. No, your father would have had a radio-controlled aircraft or radio-controlled whatever that are not on the amateur frequencies. Yep, yep. He would have been operating in a different frequency range where he's authorized. Yeah. So there's a lot of low-power radio equipment that you use all the time. Wi-Fi. You have Wi-Fi in your house. That's a radio transmitter. Are you licensed to have that? No, but it's because you're not required to be licensed to have it. It's considered low power equipment, and that's why generally it doesn't work outside your house, or maybe your neighbor can pick it up depending on how close you live, but it's not for transmitting across town. You can't get Wi-Fi from, your office to your house. And so, yes, there's a lot of low powered transmission devices. Who may select a desired call sign under the Vanity call sign rules? And the answer is any licensed amateur. So there's no, you don't have to be a general class or an extra class. You can get a Vanity call sign even as a technician class license. Which of the following is a valid call sign for a technician class amateur radio station? So there's a couple things that you need to know from this. You are not permitted to have what they call a 1x2 or a 2x1 call sign. So here's 2x1, KA1X. That's 2 letters by 1 letter. You can't have a 1x2. There's 1 letter by 2 letters. So my K7DN, that's a 1x2 call sign. That's reserved for an extra class. So what do you need to have? Something greater than that. So you can have a 2x3 or a 1x3 call sign. So a 1x or a 2x call sign tells everybody that sees that you're an extra class. But the longer call signs don't. So you're going to be issued a long call sign. You're going to get KF8 ABC, whatever you get. It will be a 2x3. And if you upgrade to an extra class, you don't have to shorten your call sign. You can keep your original call sign. So it doesn't tell me automatically, oh, you have a long call sign, you must only be a technician. Not true. But if you see a short, a 1x2 or a 2x1, you know they have to be an extra class to have that. So the question was, if you want to get a Vanity call sign as a technician, you can get a Vanity call sign, but it has to be a 1x3 or a 2x3. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that you need to know is, erase my board here. US call signs. US call signs always start with A, K, N, or W. Always. So if there's a question on your test that has some letter that's not A, K, N, or W, that is not a valid US call sign. Even with a Vanity. Yes. How do you remember this? Because this is just rote memorization. That's tough. Okay. So what is the state abbreviation for Alaska? AK. What part of the country is Alaska in? The Northwest. So when you want to know what letters can a US call sign start with, Alaska in the Northwest, AK and W. Yes, so We have some kind of letter, number, letter. Okay? This would be a 2 by 3. A 1 by 2 would be letter, number, letter. And
The
so,
line is the number.
yep, it's a 1 by 2. So as a technician, you are permitted to have a 1 by 3 or a 2 by 3. Okay?
And how long does it take to get a van when you, after you're already assigned?
Yeah, so you have to be issued a call sign in order to apply for a vanity call sign. And then you can immediately apply, and it takes generally a week or something for them to process that. I have to double check because it used, so here is something that won't surprise any of you. So the government initially decided they were going to charge money for a vanity call sign. Big surprise, the government wants to charge you money. Then, after a study of the process, after 10 years, the government decided we are so bureaucratic and bloated and terrible that the process of us charging you for your vanity call sign actually costs the government more money than they charge for a vanity call sign. They determined that it was cheaper to give you the call sign for free than to charge you money for it because of their administrative overhead. They have now decided that they want to charge again, but I don't know if that's taken effect. It may still be free or it may be $15. I'm not sure now, but yeah, the government's amazing. Well, that's the Government Accountability Office. What are the FCC rules regarding the use of phonetic alphabet for station identification in the amateur radio service? Okay. And the rule is that it's encouraged. It's not required. Okay. So the phonetic alphabet, this is in your book. It talks about Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, and so on. That is the phonetic alphabet. You will hear people use the phonetic alphabet a lot because when you're on the air, especially if you're driving, there's background noise, it's maybe difficult to hear someone's call sign. If they say B, did they say B or did they say D or what? So the use of phonetics is strongly encouraged, but it is not law. Also, the use of proper phonetics is strongly encouraged. It's a pet peeve of mine and probably every other ham radio operator, but there is no law that says you have to use the correct phonetic alphabet, but you should. It's very useful. Aircraft use the correct phonetic alphabet. The military uses the correct phonetic alphabet. However, the police have their own, which is really bizarre. But in any case, you'll hear people use something else to be cute about it. But anyways, the point is the phonetic alphabet is requested, recommended, but not required. On HF, so the worldwide frequencies, you'll hear the phonetic alphabet a lot because they're not using FM. They use single sideband. It's a very narrow bandwidth. It's kind of sounds like Donald Duck. And it's sometimes very noisy. And so the use of the phonetic alphabet is very common there. Which of the following is a requirement for the issuance of a club license grant? And the requirement is your club has to have at least 4 members. So if you want to form a ham radio club, you can form a club. You just have to have 4 members. And it's neat because you apply for a club license. The club gets a license itself, like it's its own entity, and then you can apply for a vanity call sign for that club. So when I lived here in Ohio, I used to go to a church called Only Bleed Ministries, and we got a club call sign for our church radio club. And I think the club call sign is W8OBM. So a neat thing to do. And so to form one, you just have to have 4 members.
What would be the purpose of a club?
Well, so oftentimes people will, if a club will put up a repeater, repeaters are not cheap. And so if you get 10 people together and they can all kick in $100, now you've got $1,000 to buy a repeater. Clubs would be the ones that would organize the activities to do those fox hunts to track down transmitters. A club is coming here to give you all your tests next Saturday. So it's just a group of people that they collect dues to maintain the club repeaters. So yeah, they bought it, but then when the squirrel chews through the coax at the repeater site, it needs to be purchased. That way it's not all falling on one person's shoulders. Yes. 0. There is no, so the question was, what is the minimum age to get a license? There is absolutely no minimum age. I believe that there are some ham radio operators that are 6 or 7 years old. So, and they passed the test. So how does that make you feel? But no, yeah, this is also, again, one of those very unique things that the government does not require a specific age to be able to pass the test.
Are we on that TV show? Are you as smart as a 6-year-old?
Yeah, that's right. So I have a club. So when you form a club, you have to have a trustee. And the trustee is the person who, because the club has its own license, but it's not a real person. So you have to have a trustee, essentially a sponsor of the club. And that sponsor is the one who basically is responsible for renewing the club's license, also for ensuring that the club does things lawfully and legally. And so I am the trustee of a club. And so the other thing about me, I'm a firearms instructor. And so my club call sign is K7 gun. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so the question is, how long does the club license last? It's 10 years as well. The another unique benefit is that a club, because the club's license has the same rights and privileges of its trustee, is my club license is an extra class because I'm an extra class. And so if we get together as a function, and let's say we set up a bunch of radios and we're going to have a contest and see who we can make contact with. And you're just a technician. Well, you don't have the privileges to transmit on some of the frequencies that an extra class would. Well, because you could sit down and use the club license at that event, not at home, but at that event, you can operate as an extra class during that contest. So that's another benefit to the club, is that they can host people in and use that license.
So our friends Eric and Kelly, who are not even from Ohio, looked it up for us, and we have 4 repeaters in Ohio, 1 in Cincinnati, 1 in Batavia, 4 repeaters in Milford, 1 in Cincinnati, Batavia, Goshen, and Owensville. So that's just our one area. We have 4 repeaters.
Yep. And so I'm sure with all of those, you'd be able to easily get into them with the mobile radio. And then depending on how close those actual locations are and how high profile the repeater is. I mean, a lot of times you've seen this material, right? This isn't this is engineering stuff, right? Especially as you advance on. So do you suspect that the person that works at the local radio station or TV station in Cincinnati might be a ham radio operator? Probably. You think he might be able to get his repeater station up on like the 800-foot tower that's there in Cincinnati? Probably. You think that's got good coverage? You betcha. So you'll see a lot of that. Yeah. Okay, when using tactical identifiers such as race headquarters during a community service net operation, how often must your station transmit its FCC assigned call sign? Everybody should automatically already be saying, well, it is every 10 minutes and at the end of that conversation. And the answer is at the end of the communication and every 10 minutes. So the fact that you're using a tactical identifier such as race headquarters means nothing. That means nothing. It's made up.
What is race headquarters?
So a good example is in ham radio clubs, oftentimes can solicit donations. A lot of times there'll be a nonprofit organization. And so maybe there's a bicycle race here in town, you know, and it's 50-mile long race. Well, the event coordinator might say, we would really like to know what people are getting to what checkpoints on that race station, but how do we know? Well, you could make a donation to your local ham radio club. They could set people out at different positions, and they could be, I'm at position 1 and position 2 and position 3 and race headquarters. And I'd be another ham radio operator sitting at race headquarters. And I could say, race headquarters, this is position 1, riders 2, 5, and 7 just passed. Yes? Yeah. So the question was, can't they just do that with a cell phone? And the answer is yes. But if race headquarters is on the phone with position 1, can they get a call from position 2 at the same time? No. I mean, call waiting, but the point is, could you get it? No. And then are you going to just stay on the phone the entire time with a lot of dead air as you're waiting for the next rider? It's much more convenient and practical just to be able to pick up the microphone and say, race headquarters is position 1, riders, blah, 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 I just went through.
Like multiple walkie-talkies.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So say that like you're,
Like position.
say that like you're doing it so I can hear what it's.
Sure. So in this case, I would say race headquarters, this is position 1, riders 2, 5, and 7 just passed.
And then you have to say your call sign at the end.
I have to say it every 10 minutes because my conversation with them is really open-ended. So every 10 minutes, I'd have to say it. But once I've said it so 10 minutes elapses, K7DN, and then I don't talk for another half hour, well, then that's fine. I don't have to keep saying it every 10 minutes because I haven't communicated since then. Well, at that point, you can say it's ended or not ended. The point is that I could just keep saying my call sign every 10 minutes. Yeah. Or if I haven't communicated, I don't need to ID because there's nothing to ID. I haven't communicated. But the point is to identify your transmission. If there hasn't been a transmission, then there's nothing to identify.
So every time you call.
Right. Yeah, because obviously in a race, people will be spread out, but they will be coming in waves probably. And so I'm not going to just ID just because I've transmitted. I'm going to wait probably every 10 minutes and because I'm continually relaying information. Which of the following is an acceptable language to use for station identification when operating in a phone subband? Okay, phone means voice. If you see the word phone, they mean voice.
Why don't you just say voice now?
I don't know. So phone is voice. So what is the acceptable language for identification? English. English only. Can you communicate on ham radio using a language other than English? Yes, absolutely. But you must identify in English. Yeah, internationally too. Well, that would be dependent on their, because these are FCC rules. Only applies in the US. Yep.
So, but when you do communicate with people around the world, if you do, how are they identifying themselves? In English?
Yes, almost always. Yep, because they're talking to me in English. I don't speak any other language.
Right.
English is the universal language around the world. So
And that's what you're required as an airline pilot.
absolutely.
In France or
Yep.
or whatever.
Yep.
You're talking to the tower in English. That's what you're called.
Yes. Yep. Yep. That is absolutely correct. I'm sorry. Oh, that's International Telecommunications Union. Yeah, the thing to understand is you must identify in English, but you are permitted to use any language to communicate. But the identification, so if you and I were talking in Spanish, that's totally fine. But once 10 minutes rolls around, switch to English, identify, K70N, and then hable español. So, which of the following formats of a self-assigned indicator is acceptable when identifying a phone transmission? Phone means voice. Okay, so I'm speaking and I'm using a self-assigned. What does that mean? I gave it to myself, not the FCC. And what is acceptable? And the answer is all of them.
FCC assigned call sign.
Well, in this example, this is your FCC assigned call sign, and then you're just adding something to it.
What would be the purpose to add?
Yeah, so the purpose to add is back in the old days, before there was vanity call signs, everybody would be issued a call sign based on their call letter or call number district. So in Ohio, it's 8. In Washington State, which is where I was licensed at, it's 7. That's why I have a 7 call sign. Okay, and so what you used to do is, and the law actually required this back in the day, it's not required now, but if I were to operate portable, meaning I'm not at my home station, I'm here in Ohio operating with my 7 call sign, I would have to indicate that. And so I would say K7DN stroke W8 or 8, meaning I'm K7DN, but I'm operating in the 8 area. So when you hear me, you know that I'm not at my home station. You don't know exactly where, but somewhere in this 8 call district. 3 would be, yes. That's again goes back to very old time. So it's just an indicator. Yep. And so could you say stroke, slant, or slash? It doesn't matter. You can say whatever you want. And in fact, most people now don't even say it at all because it's completely irrelevant. You could get your KE8 ABC call sign today, get your vanity call sign next week, and then decide your vanity call sign because of the letters you want. Maybe you want W0ABC because you want ABC really bad and it's only available in W0. Well, fine, you're going to get it. Guess what? You're not in the 0 area. You're in the 8 area. Doesn't matter.
Do you ever use your name, like Matthew, when you're speaking to people?
I mean, people will say, I'll call somebody and they'll say, hi, my name is Jim. And I'll say, yeah, my name is Matthew. But no, I mean, it's always using my call sign, which identifies my station, and it's what most people care about anyways. Because most of the time you're going to have a very casual conversation. They may not remember who you are, but they'll know your call sign probably before they know your real name.
Where can we find this list of numbers for the states?
It's in your book. There's
It
a,
is, it's right there, it's on page 41.
yeah, page 41 is mapped, is the map in your book. Right. So there, if I said K7DN, people are going to assume that's in Washington State by the 7, and then you might say stroke 3 or stroke 8 or slant 3, because then I'm telling you, hey, I'm not where you think I am. I'm really here, because people can look up my call sign and see where I'm at. They can look it up and find the FCC record, and that record says, oh, you live in Richmond, Indiana, except I'm not there. I'm somewhere else. And that's why I'm telling you I'm in stroke 8. No, my call sign, your call sign should say wherever you are at now. So if you look up my call sign, if you look me up, K7DN, it will tell you that I'm in Richmond, Indiana.
Because you changed your address.
Yes, because you have to let the FCC know. If they can't contact you because they need to send you notice, and if they're sending you notice, it's because you've done something wrong. If they can't contact you, they'll revoke your license. So you have to keep it updated.
So if your station is in your car, and you're driving around state by state.
Well, again, that's fine. Your state, your license is essentially, it's you that's licensed, not your house.
Right.
So you're allowed to operate anywhere that you're allowed to operate, but you still have to have a home address.
Right. But your station is your, am I correct that, like, if you have a handheld, that's your station?
Yes.
And if your handheld goes from here to Godswill Lake or our house, it's now, my station is up here, and if I bring it to the church, my station is here.
That's why if you look at those other questions, it talks about your station license or station grant. It's talking about your home address location to where it was issued to you at. It was, yes. Now it's been updated.
So when you say that across the video, scale 7cc, that's telling someone you're in Washington State, but because you have moved in, then use.
I could.
But you don't have to.
Right, but you don't have to.
But by your station number itself, you're telling people you're in Washington State.
Correct.
Just independent of reality.
Yep.
It tells people.
Yep,
And you don't have to reveal the amount.
that's correct. Because especially anymore, people are just going to hop on their phone or on their computer, look your call sign up, and they're going to see where you're at. And people are so used to the numbers getting all mixed around. You know, it was a great idea back in the day because it gave you a general idea of which region you're communicating with. But especially when they went to Vanity call signs, it all went out the window.
So you're saying this is obsolete, basically?
Yeah, it's obsolete because it's not required. But what they want you to know is that if you choose to do it, there is no requirement on what exactly you say, because it's a self-assigned indicator. Another self-assigned indicator. I'm driving around in my car. I could just say K7DN, but you know what? I might want to say K7DN mobile. Or let's say I'm walking around with my handheld radio. I might want to say K7DN portable. No. So the question was, could you use somebody else's call sign? That's called, informally, it's called bootlegging, and it's illegal. Yeah, because then you're falsely identifying who you are. What's that? Oh, it doesn't happen often, but does it happen? Of course, yeah. Yep. Okay, what is the International Telecommunications Union, ITU? Easiest way to remember this is the ITU is United Nations. So it's part of the United Nations. The ITU basically is what's formed together to allow countries to communicate. Because as mentioned before, you have specific frequencies you're allowed to operate on. Well, if only the United States use those frequencies for ham radio, could you talk to someone in Japan? No, because they would be on a different one. That wouldn't work. And so the ITU helps coordinate, okay, these sets of frequencies are for ham radio, these set are for police and fire, and these set are for government and military. And so it allows ham radio operators to communicate with other ham radio operators using the same frequencies. Which countries are FCC licensed amateur radio stations prohibited from exchanging communications? And it's any country that the ITU objects, any country that has notified the ITU that it objects to such communications. So you're allowed to communicate with any other country that the ITU has coordinated that with. Question, yes? No. So the question was, if the ITU decided to block communications in a country, would you stop hearing them? Or, and basically, the ITU has no authority to do that. So, for example, in Ukraine, the Ukrainian government has prohibited amateur radio communications inside their country because of the war. So the ITU, just like the UN, has no authority. UN can't come in here and tell me I can't have guns. They would like to, but the US government says, no, we have a constitution. So the ITU doesn't enforce that. It is the ITU, though, that helps coordinate those things. So right now, anybody that's transmitting out of the Ukraine would be violating the Ukrainian law. But if those people still chose to operate and they said, the heck with you, I need to let people know what's going on, well, you're still going to hear it. They're still transmitting, and then Ukraine would have to come down on them. But it would be possible that if the Ukrainian government went to the ITU and said, we don't want to allow amateur communications during this period of time, then you would be violating the law by transmitting to them. But if they're still transmitting, you can still hear it. And there's nothing they can do to stop that.
Only two countries so far right now are North Korea and Eritrea that don't allow it, right?
I believe that's correct. Yep. What types of international communications are permitted to an FCC amateur station? All right, this is important. This is definitely something that trips people up, but it's pretty simple. It's basically communications that are for remarks of a personal character, personal nature. It's not for broadcasting. It's not for propaganda purposes. It may be, it probably wouldn't be to say, to talk to someone in Ukraine or Russia and say, hey, I saw, that there were troop movements here and here, passing along that kind of information. But if you spoke to someone in Russia and said, hey, how are things going over there? You know, I've heard that your currency is devalued. You know, are you able to buy food? You know, it's things of a personal nature. It's not, you know, military or tactical type information. Obviously, under non-war circumstances, it becomes even more obvious. What do you talk about? Well, what's the weather over there? You know, I'm talking to someone in Brazil. You know, we're just coming into spring. You're just now going into winter because you're in the southern hemisphere. You know, what's your weather like down there? Wow, your signal's really good. What kind of radio are you using? What kind of antenna setup do you have? Those kind of things, you know. I have pet kangaroos. You know, do you have a pet monkey? You know, I mean, it's basically it's personal communication, right? That's what it's for. It's not for the purposes of business. It's not for passing along military or tactical information. That's really what they want to drill in, because there's a lot of other questions that are about this. And just note that it's for personal communications.
FCC, not ITU.
Correct. What's meant by the term third-party communications? And it's a message from a control operator to another amateur station control operator on behalf of another person. So I'm licensed, Leah's licensed, Michelle didn't get her license. Michelle has a message for Leah, and it says, I'm studying really hard. Michelle gives me that paper, and I say, hey, Leah, this is Matthew. I've got a message from Michelle. Michelle says she's studying really hard. That is third-party communications, because I'm delivering the message, but the content isn't my own, right? It's on behalf of someone else who's not licensed. Third-party communications. Third-party communications was very popular in the Vietnam War. We had people in Vietnam, no cell phones, no internet. You needed to get a message back to your family. Hey, I'm okay. They would go to an amateur radio operator over there and say, contact my family and tell them I'm okay. And somebody would radio that over the HF frequencies to the United States. Somebody in the United States would copy that message down and actually write it down in a letter and mail it to their home. It was called a radiogram, and that was done exclusively on ham radio. So another great amateur radio service to community. You don't see it as often now because we do have cell phones, but when these hurricanes come in, Hurricane Katrina, and these hurricanes devastate places and they lose power, most of the time a cell tower, which may or may not have a diesel generator, maybe has 3 days worth of fuel. And if the roads and everything's trashed up because there's trees everywhere, you can't get a diesel truck out to refuel it, cell phone towers start going down. Internet providers start going down because they've got a diesel generator, but only for about 3 days, because they might only have a few hundred or even a few thousand gallons of fuel. It will eventually run out and stuff starts going down, going off grid. But your ham radio, which can run off of your car battery and can relay communications all around the world, or at least outside of the disaster area where there are services, like the internet is working. You know, the internet might not work in Louisiana when the hurricane comes, but it works further north. And so you can get to somebody in Missouri and then they can email it out to somebody else. And so amateur radio is still incredibly useful and relevant. Yes.
Personal experience with that. When Katrina hit, part of our team went down there. I stayed at Bright Top. But a family that was trapped in their attic, there were 8 people. water came up, they had to keep going up. They were as high as they could go, and they had a hurricane-proof roof, they couldn't bust through it. Somehow, through text, they got a message out to someone who in turn knew a ham operator who contacted, because they were down in Louisiana. They contacted a family member of these people in Akron. Those people got this message to the American Red Cross. Red Cross contacted us at Right Pat, and in turn, we were able to contact the military down in Katrina and give them the coordinates, because we triangulated the location, give them the coordinates of this house. And we could hear the helicopter as they were hovering right overhead of where these people were trapped. So, yeah, that's the communication.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to serve your community, ham radio is a great way to do it, because you'll have capabilities that these commercial radio systems, like what the police and fire use, are quite limited. They generally only go within this scope. I mean, there's no point in your local fire department having communications outside your city, because they don't generally put out fires outside your city. That's what the other fire department's for. And so they don't have very much range. It's built to give them coverage where they need it, and that's it. But ham radio is not designed to be constrained to an area. It's meant for as far as it can reach.
In that topic, how does that, how are the satellite phones displacing that?
They're not really, because satellite phones are still tremendously expensive, and even having one on standby that you don't use still requires a service that you pay monthly for.
I don't think in that example, the roof would block the signal. Satellite phones.
Maybe it would depend on the material. I mean, usually it's, the asphalt shingles and wood would definitely reduce the signal, but not block it on those frequencies.
What happens when repeaters go down?
Then they go down. Yeah. I mean, repeaters, especially if they're located, at a TV station or whatever, when the TV station loses power, the repeater is going to lose power. But repeaters are generally for local communications. And if you need to, you can switch to simplex, which is direct communications. And if that's not enough range, you start getting into the HF frequencies, communicate around the world. Yeah, the repeaters are going to be on different frequencies. Yeah. What type of international communication? Oh, very covered. Okay. Which of the following restrictions apply when a non-licensed person is allowed to speak to a foreign station using a station under the control of a technician class control operator? This scenario is, you come over to my house, you don't have your license yet, and I say, hey, you want to use my radio and check this out. I hand you the microphone, okay? You're now being allowed to speak. And the answer is that there has to be a third-party agreement. Just like third-party communications, it's not my message, my words, it's somebody else's. In this case, it's an actual person speaking, and so there's a third-party agreement. Absolutely. So the question was, if there was a violation, who's responsible? Me. I'm the licensee. Yeah. That's why I have to be at the control point of the station. I essentially have to be controlling it. Now you can pick up the mic and key the mic, but I have to be there to turn the power off if you go nuts and start doing something you shouldn't do. Yes. Yep. So if there was a club event and you have a club station, but the club license is not an extra class license, and somebody dials up a radio into the extra class frequencies and tried using it, they would be in violation, and the trustee of the club would be responsible for that.
What is the third party agreement? How is that?
Verbal?
No, this would be something filed with the ITU again. And it's because, so there are, most countries I'm allowed to talk to as a ham radio operator, but there are a number of countries that don't allow third-party communications. So, well, I don't know which country it is, but let's say England, and it's not England, but let's say it is. I could get on the radio, talk to someone in England, no problem. But somebody who's unlicensed couldn't sit down at my station and talk to that same person in England, because there might not be a third-party agreement. Yes, it's with the other end.
Government,
Yes,
third party agreement with the FCC.
with the ITU.
So that has nothing to do with like us.
Well, we enter, so, it's just like with any agreement, all the countries sign on and say, the ITU drafts a charter and it says, we want to allow ham radio operators to communicate. Who signs on to that? Everybody except North Korea and Eritrea sign it. Okay, now we know who the hams can talk to. Now let's draft another agreement. What countries will allow third-party communications over ham
We need to
radio?
know that before we attempt allowing somebody to.
Yes.
So we need to know, we're talking to a different country. We need to know if that country allows a third party to be speaking.
Yes,
How do we find out?
it's published. Yeah. Yeah, so they're saying the book references you where to look to get those. And those agreements technically are fluid, right? They could be updated at any time. So you'd want to research those.
So we can sit and talk to them and repeat the message about that. That's my question.
Well, that's still third-party communication. So there still needs to be a third-party agreement, no matter who's saying it, you're relaying.
Good thing Carl says hi.
Yeah, I mean, technically, it's third-party communications, no matter how minimal. The list of countries that don't allow that is pretty small, and odds are you're not going to communicate with them. I mean, because why wouldn't you allow this? I mean, really, like first world countries have no problem with it. It's like third world dictatorships that have problems with some of this stuff. And hopefully you don't have family there. Yeah. So that's why it generally is a real non-issue, but is it something you need to know for the law? Yeah.
And you would find out by.
Yes. Well, the UN, yeah. When are you allowed to operate your amateur station in a foreign country? And it's when the foreign country authorizes it. So there'll be yet another list somewhere, but technically it's the countries that decide that. But yes, and in many cases, you are permitted to even use your own call sign in a foreign country. In fact, if you go to England, you would say, I would operate in England, I would say K7DN stroke M or M stroke K7DN. That just indicates, and that's how they want you to identify that, yes, you're a US station, but you're operating here legally. And that their government would publish those regulations.
How do you travel with your put it through the thing, pack it?
Yeah, no different than your laptop.
Is that question possibly?
The question was, how do you travel with your radio? The same way you would with any other electronic device. Yeah. Nope. From which of the following locations may an FCC licensed amateur station transmit? This is from any vessel or craft located in international waters and documented or registered in the United States. Okay, there's no trick to this. It's just, oh, you're going to have to remember that. So when you see this question, where can you transmit? It's going to talk about from international waters, and it's documented or registered in the United States. So does this mean that you can operate from a cruise ship? Probably not, because most of those cruise ships are foreign registered ships. The question, I guess, if you want to understand this better, the way you should think of it is, in which of the following locations does your FCC license allow you to operate? And if you operate in England, it's not because the FCC allowed you to. They don't care about the US government in England. Because if people wouldn't pass out like flies, I'd probably just keep going. So you stop me.
I tell you, I have read a good portion of the book, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm like,
No, because we just stated some laws. We haven't done anything.
I know, yeah, I'm like, okay. Okay, you guys are going good.
Okay, when is an amateur station permitted to transmit without a control operator? Never. You always have to have a control operator. Who may be the control operator of a station communicating through an amateur satellite or space station? So it's any amateur whose license privileges allow them to transmit on the satellite uplink frequency. Okay, so satellites have an uplink and a downlink. They're different. So it hears on one set of frequencies and transmits back down on another. That also is what allows it to transmit in full duplex, meaning it can hear and transmit simultaneously. And the reason why it can do that, so it doesn't interfere with itself, is that it's hearing on one frequency and transmitting on a separate one. It is a transceiver because it has both receive and transmit functions in this case, but it would be a full duplex transceiver. Yep. And I don't know if they cover it, they probably do. Just an interesting bit of information. In order to put your own satellite into space, which ham radio operators do regularly, you have to be an extra class. Yes, it does take a lot of money. Yep.
Okay, back to the question somebody had about the third-party communications. They were kind of joking about not letting your kids on. That was only applying to international things. Like if you're in the United States and you want to talk to somebody in the United States, you may allow third-party communication.
Yes.
So your kids can go on
Oh, absolutely.
and should.
Yes. Yep. And so every, I think it's every June, ARRL puts on what they call Field Day. And Field Day is an exercise that has people go out into the field and you set up communications. And ideally, I mean, there's people that operate from their home and operate from a club station. But the idea is that you would go to a location, like a middle of a field, set up solar panels, set up a generator, set up your car battery, whatever you have, and you would then put up antennas and set up your radios and a little tent and And the idea is then you make as many contacts, and different contacts are worth different points, and they've got all different kinds of rules. But you make as many contacts as you can, and it says, it builds a realistic scenario that says, if there was a disaster, your home is gone, there's no infrastructure, could you go to the middle of nowhere, set up radios and antennas and portable power and operate and talk to people not only around the country, but around the world? And clubs all around the United States do this. And one of the things that they give special points for is they have a GOTA station, which is get on the air. And it's people that can use it are people who have been like inactive for 5 years or something like that, or non-hams. And so they love to invite Boy Scout troops and Cub Scout troops and just anybody come out, and it gives them experience doing that. And of course, they can work to earn that merit badge. But yeah, we want third-party communications, especially within the United States. It's very good to encourage kids to do that.
The word of the answer says any amateur whose license privilege is not satellite given, they're saying that it's given by the students, right? I mean, whose license privilege is allowed to transmit, so they're saying that if you have amateur license, then you have the license privilege.
Well, it's because it says that because the satellite uplink frequency could be a variety of frequencies, and you could find yourself not having that privilege.
So then any amateur cannot talk necessarily.
Right, it's any amateur whose license privileges allow that. If your license privilege doesn't allow it, then you can't talk there.
That's what the confusion negated by.
Well, but not every, but let's say that there's one satellite that has frequencies that a technician can't talk on, but there's 20 that have frequencies that technicians can talk on. Can you talk on a satellite? Yes. Can you talk on every satellite? No, there'd be that one that you can't.
The answer is a little confusing, but clarify, it's too wide open. Yeah.
Now, legally, no.
Below D. That part.
The explanation is, okay, real answers, good. That's why I saw fun.
You should write Gordon West, who wrote your book. Who must designate the station control operator? The answer is the station licensee. So it's you. You're the station licensee. You may allow your child to sit and control the station by picking up the microphone and talking on it, but it's you must designate who's doing that, because you are the one responsible for what happens. When the control operator is not the station licensee, who is responsible for the proper operation of the station? Okay, the answer is it's both. The control operator and the station licensee are equally responsible.
So that's like in a club situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, even technically your child, although children generally don't get in trouble for things like that. It falls to the parents, but yeah, in the example of a club station and somebody operates a piece of equipment inappropriately, we'll say, then the station licensee and that person are both responsible.
Back to the questions.
Question from Zoom here. What's the difference between amateur to extra license? Actually, and amateur, that was how they worded it. So explain.
Yeah, so there's only 3 license classes that you can obtain now.
All amateur.
Yes, it's amateur radio. There's technician, general, and its long form is called amateur extra. Most people just say extra class.
Could you explain just for people, because it is kind of confusing, the word amateur makes it sound like that would be the lowest form, but that's literally includes everybody. Everybody is an amateur radio operator.
Yeah, ham radio is amateur radio. The two are synonymous. They're used interchangeably. And amateur, a lot of times people would think, oh, that means like you're low class, or you're not skilled, you're not professional. Well, it does literally mean not professional, because professional means paid and amateur means hobby or unpaid. And the book should have beat that into your brain, that you do not get paid to operate the radio. And you can't accept compensation for operating the radio. So you are quite literally an amateur operator, as opposed to a disc jockey, which is a professional operator.
Okay, so I think their question was, what's the difference between classes?
Yeah, so the difference is technician class is the entry level license, which is what everybody's studying for. It gives you primary operating frequencies within the VHF and UHF spectrum. Then when you get your general class, you gain additional frequencies within HF. And then when you get to your extra class, you get a very, very small additional piece of frequency and bragging rights. It's really, you don't gain very much. Like, I would love to see everybody get their extra class, but in reality, if everyone just got their general class, they would be very competent. They would have the worldwide communications abilities and be able to do 99% of all ham radio activities. So it's very small gain. It's really just bragging rights for the most part.
Okay, one more question from Zoom. How on earth would you get a satellite up? That sounds awesome.
Yeah, well, so you would go to NASA, and now you'd go to Elon Musk and SpaceX or Russia, and you pay them money and they add that onto their payload. I mean, it's not cheap. It's several $100,000. I think what I've heard is around $200,000 or $250,000 to launch a satellite. But again, a lot of these satellites are put up by, again, clubs, not individuals. A lot of the clubs have backing. MIT, guess what? They have a ham radio club, and the college is definitely funding those things for experimentations, and a lot of scientific institutes will do that, because ham radio operators have access to frequencies. Like I told you, they're worth trillions of dollars. And so can you do experimentation on those frequencies? Yes, that's actually what the government encourages. That's really one of the main reasons to do ham radio. So yeah, you can get a lot of backing through scientific organizations for that. When the control operator is not the station control licensee, who's responsible? Okay, we talked about that. It's both. What determines the transmitting privileges of an amateur station? And the answer is the class of the operator license held by the control operator. So we're talking about a station. Well, the station could be my house, right? Like, that's where my equipment's at. Could be my car, or my handheld radio, if I'm holding it, is now my station. But if it's a handheld radio and I set it on the table and you come and pick it up without my permission, but you just come and pick it up and use it, well, now its license, its privileges are whatever your privileges are, which today would be none, and hopefully next week will be a technician class. Yep. So it's all about whoever is that station, the control operator. So in the case of a club, and if I had radio set up and I'm allowing you to use it under my club license, I'm considered to be the control operator. Yeah. And so you could operate with it with whatever privileges I have, because I'm the control operator. When under normal circumstances, may a technician class licensee be the control operator of a station operating in an exclusive amateur extra class operator segment of the amateur bands? The answer is at no time. If you become the control operator, meaning you're doing it on your own, but you're at my extra class station, but you're on your own, like I didn't give you permission. I'm not sitting there as the control operator. Could you operate? Well, but I'm at an extra station. It doesn't matter. It falls on your license at that point. If you operate under my license, as me as the control operator, then you get to use my privileges. But if you become a control operator, it's under your license privileges. What is an amateur station control point? And it's the location at which the control operation function is performed. So the control point is wherever that station can be controlled at. So again, if you're sitting next to me and I'm allowing you to use my radio, I'm still the control operator. You might have the microphone, but I got the power button. I can control the station. Yep. It's not made to be complicated. It's just made to make sure that you understand who's responsible and when.
So it's the point where the control operator has the command, the power.
Yes. Yep. Which of the following is an example of automatic control? And the answer is repeater operation. So we'll talk about repeaters a little bit. We're still going to get into it some more. Okay. All right. So my terrible artwork. So which of the following is an example of automatic control? Okay, well, it's repeater operation. A repeater, just like a satellite, in a way, receives on one frequency, but transmits on another. It does this because it allows it to hear and talk simultaneously. That's called duplex. And the way that that works is person here, person here, this person is going to talk to this person. Well, how do they do it? This person talks to the repeater on this frequency. This person isn't listening to me. They're listening to the repeater. They're listening on this frequency. So let's say this is so when I key my radio, I'm transmitting on 448.350. The repeater hears that and simultaneously transmits what I'm saying on 443.350. This person hears me talking with virtually no delay. It's simultaneously hearing and sending it out. And then when this person wants to talk back, They just do it in reverse. They then transmit on 448 350, and I'm hearing the repeater on 443 350. This allows full duplex communication at the repeater. Yeah, so the question was, do you have to keep changing your radio to do that? And the answer is no. So your radio will have what they call an offset. And oftentimes it's automatically set within the radio. And so you would put this frequency in on your radio because that's where you're going to hear the repeater at. And then when you key your radio, it automatically transmits here. And when you unkey your radio, it automatically starts receiving here. You don't have to do anything. It's just by pushing the push to talk button, it's automatically switching back and forth. The repeater doesn't switch back and forth because it always hears here and always transmits there, and it does it simultaneously. So anything it hears here, it sends out there. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, how is the repeater frequency determined? So the repeaters are always on a fixed frequency. Now that frequency will vary because and different repeaters are on different frequencies, but the repeater frequency won't change. It's always going to be where it is, and it's not purchased. It's free for anybody to use. And so we have a gentleman's agreement. It's not law that determines where repeaters go. And that's like that on purpose because the activity that happens on these frequencies isn't only talking to repeaters. There's other types of communication. So we want to make sure that repeater communication is in one spot. Satellite communication is in a different spot. Satellites, when they communicate down to the earth, they're going to shower the whole hemisphere, everything that can be seen from that satellite. You don't want that on a repeater frequency because it'll start getting picked up by the repeaters all across the country, across the hemisphere. So they're in their own section. And so we have repeater coordinating bodies, and it's just local ham radio operators that formed a coordination body, and you apply to them and say, I want a frequency. They do a study to determine where your coverage would likely be so that you don't interfere with somebody else. Because you can't say, oh, I'm going to have a repeater and it's going to have 100-mile coverage. Well, maybe, but probably not. And if it doesn't have 100-mile coverage, then I want to put another repeater just 60 miles away from you so that people can kind of go from place to place and continue to talk because your radio just can't reach that far. You don't have a tower that high. Now you go out west where there's mountains and you put up a repeater up on a 10,000-foot mountain, it might very well have 100-mile coverage in all directions. And so they need to make sure that they space them out. But anyways, it's a gentleman's agreement on where those things go, and it's coordinated that way. Yes? Yeah, so it's repeaterbook.com. Yep. Okay. All right, so back to this automatic operation. So I talked a little bit about how a repeater works. We're going to talk about this more. And it talked about it's an automatically controlled repeater station. This repeater isn't always transmitting. It's not just like dead keying on the air, like always sending a signal. It starts transmitting when it receives a signal. It doesn't need to transmit until it receives the signal. The thing that the receiver is on, it's always listening, but there's not always something to hear. It hears the signal. There's a controller that's doing automatic operation. The controller says, oh, there's a signal there. Start transmitting, and then it transmits. That's automatic control of the repeater. So it has some kind of a device that activates the transmitter when it should be activated and turns the transmitter off when it should be turned off. That controller is also going to say, it's going to start a timer. It's going to say, I started transmitting. And in 9.5 minutes, I'm going to have to identify. And then it kicks off a voice recording or a Morse code and transmits and identifies that repeater.
How many communications can a repeater handle?
Well, that's, yeah, one. It depends. General analog repeaters, one. Digital repeaters can be 2. Well, so digital repeaters, the way digital works is, and it depends on the mode, it's way beyond technician class, but they have time slots, and it's basically, you know, I'm talking, so I've got my voice coming in, something like that, and then there's a device here, and it's converting it to ones and zeros, okay? And then we're going to combine these ones and zeros into a big long data stream. But in this data stream, I'm going to have a time slot 1, time slot 2, time slot 1, time slot 2. And I'm going to say, if you're transmitting on time slot 1, I'm going to take your digitized voice and drop it here. And then somebody else who's also transmitting, they're on time slot 2. I'm going to drop there here. And it will the computer that's reassembling this will just pick out the bits and pieces for time slot 1 and assemble them together. And on the other end, you're just going to hear somebody talking like they're normal. And on the other time slot, it'll reassemble those, and it allows people to transmit simultaneously and be worked that way. Obviously, that only happens in digital communications, because otherwise, it's just the repeater hears the signal coming in and just retransmits it out. So it's one person. So, but it's, you know, you will get multiple people will talk on the repeater at the same time, not simultaneously, but it would be just like this, and I'll transmit and say, yeah, hey guys, how's it going? And then you'll respond back, yeah, I'm doing well. And then you unkey, and then you'll get on and say, yeah, I'm doing well too. It's a little dreary today. And then you'll unkey, and then somebody else might say, yeah, well, over here it's actually sunny. And right, it is definitely not a party line. It's called half duplex or semi duplex. I talk, you listen. You talk, I listen. It's one at a time. But everybody hears it. Yep. I mean, but it's basically just like we're talking today. Everyone in this room hears me. And if 2 of you start trying to talk to me at the same time, then it just doesn't work, because I can't make out either of you. I know you're both there, but I don't know what you're saying. So it's really just no different than group communication in a room. Yep. Which of the following is an example of remote control as defined by Part 97? The answer is operating the station over the internet. So they have radios now that you can set up at your home, plug in an internet connection, and then from your laptop at your office, you could then remotely control your radio and start talking to people around the world, remotely controlling your radio that way. Just don't let your boss catch you. But that's remote control. They have something called IRLP, Internet Radio Linking Project. So I mentioned before that we have repeater stations that are linked over the internet. Well, you can remotely control the IRLP node, and then what they do is they have touch tones, like on a telephone, You can key up the repeater, dial in a code, and it would connect one repeater to another over the internet. And now those two repeaters are linked. You're able to talk to each other. You punch in a code and it terminates the link. Which of the following is true of remote control operation? They're all correct. So that the control operator must be at the control point. So for remote control, let's say I am controlling it over the internet. Well, then the point of control is my laptop connected to the internet that allows me to turn on or turn off that radio. I'm still at the control point. It's a remote control point. The control operator is required at all times. I have to attend to it. And the control operator indirectly manipulates the controls. That's right, I'm on my laptop controlling a radio at my house. Who does the FCC presume to be the control operator of an amateur station unless documentation to the contrary is in the station records? The answer is the station licensee. What does this mean, or how does it apply? Okay, you are not required by law to keep a station log, but it's recommended that you would keep a station log. And so every contact that I make, I might write it down. Oh, I talked to this person at this time. Here's their signal report. Here's my signal, what they told me my signal was. And I might have a comment on there like what radio they used or where they're at. So if the FCC hears that communication using my call sign, who are they going to assume it is? Me. Okay. So how would they know otherwise? Well, maybe in my station log, if I allowed somebody to come over and use my station, they logged in as themselves and logged the contact. And then the FCC says, well, you know, on January 12th at such and such time, we heard this communication. You're like, oh, well, I was vacationing in Florida at that time. And I let so-and-so come over to my house. Here's my station log. They're the ones that did that. So it's just, is that likely? I mean, again, it doesn't matter whether it's likely. The FCC wants you to know, who do they think is using your station? You. How do they know otherwise? You've logged it in some way. No. Your station is your station. It's the radio. No, your station isn't. Right.
That radio, this radio, this radio, his radio, whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, but if you're using my station, like you're coming over to my house, is registered, yeah, they're going to assume that anything coming from there, because that's where it's documented. Yep.
So she's cleaning your house, she doesn't have necessarily permission. Something happens, she gets on your station. That's her license that she's operating?
Yes.
On your station.
Because he didn't say you should do it.
Right. Yeah, but I wasn't the control operator because I wasn't there to control it. In which of the following circumstances may the control operator of an amateur station receive compensation for operating that station? When can you get paid to use ham radio? Never is your answer. There's always an exception. The exception is if you're a teacher and it's incidental to the instruction. So if I was a teacher and I was teaching in the high school, a class, and I have my ham radio, am I being paid specifically to operate my ham radio? No, in fact, I'm not even paid to teach ham radio, right? I'm a science teacher, and that just happens to be the subject of the day. But I am receiving a paycheck, and I keyed the radio to show the students, here's how you talk to a repeater. And look, I can talk to somebody around the world. Oh, well, you got paid to use ham radio. It was incidental. I wasn't paid specifically. It was not like I became a cab dispatcher. So that's the only exception. Who's accountable should a repeater inadvertently retransmit communications that violate the FCC rules? The answer is the control operator of the originating station. So I have a repeater. It repeats everything it hears. The repeater is under automatic control. The control operator is the person who initiates that communication. The repeater just does its thing automatically, but who's the control operator? You, the one that talked into it. Are you allowed to transmit music over the background, over ham radio, even if it's in the background? No, the answer is no. You're never allowed to communicate music. So one exception, because there always is, I'll get to it. But you're in your car talking on the repeater and you've got the radio turned up and I can hear music coming over. That's against the law. Who's responsible? Not the repeater owner. You should have turned your music down. So that's what this is about. No, it's because they don't want you to be able to broadcast. Ham radio isn't FM broadcast or AM. Yep.